In this video, we'll be demonstrating how to replace a sync port assembly in the iPhone 3GS. This assembly includes a sync port, cellular antenna, and microphone. This tutorial will also work for the iPhone 3G, however be sure to purchase the correct part as they are different. Our first step will be to power off the device. Now to get started, we'll remove two small Phillips screws on opposite sides of the sync port. Now we'll apply our suction cup and open the screen on an angle. There are three cables attached near the bottom, so be careful while doing this. Now before we can remove the front assembly, we have three cables to undo. Now the first two cables we'll remove simply unplug from the board. And we'll unplug these using our case opener tool. So you do this by wedging your case opener tool just beneath the cables and prying gently in the upward direction, and they should come out. Now this last cable is a little different. It's actually held into a port with tension. And to release the tension, we're going to lift this black tab in the vertical direction. And that will allow us to simply slide the cable out of the port. In order to remove the sync port assembly, we'll have to remove the entire logic board, as this part does extend below the board. Our next step will be to unplug the cables being pointed out here. There'll be a total of 4 in the 3GS and 3 in the 3G. This cable 7 will not exist in the 3G model. All of these cables should be removed using your non-conductive pry tool. Get underneath of them and gently lift up. You shouldn't have to force anything because then you could risk damaging the ports. We'll now remove 3 screws shown here that are holding the sync port assembly in place. Now the next step is going to be to remove 7 Phillips screws that are holding the logic board in place. One of which is underneath of a sticker. Now the purpose of this sticker is that it voids your warranty. And it should be assumed anytime you're opening a device that your warranty will be void. Our next step will be to remove 1 Phillips screw holding the camera in place, which is located in the upper right of the device. There is also a small piece of metal that will come out with this screw, and the purpose of that piece of metal is to hold the camera in place. With that screw removed, we want to take our case opener tool and gently wedge upwards to remove the camera from its port. Now we just have to remove the logic board, and when doing so, you want to be careful that this metal ground pin does not tear the cable which only exists in the 3GS model. If you're working on a 3G, you don't have to worry about this. One final step before we can remove the board is that the SIM tray will have to be removed. Now you can either do this using your flathead as shown in the video, or use the SIM tray removal tool from the outside. Now to remove the board, we're going to take our plastic case opener tool and we're going to wedge upwards in various locations on the board. We're now free to remove the sink port assembly from the device. With the old one removed, we can grab our replacement sink port assembly. The speaker being pointed out here will be inserted into an opening in the back housing. Another thing to note is that the metal screw holes on the sink port assembly will sit on top of the metal screw holes on the chrome bezel. We'll now reinsert the 3 screws being pointed out here. Once these screws are in place, we can grab our logic board. A couple things that should be noted when installing the logic board. Be gentle. Don't force anything. Once you have it in the right positions, it will slip into its place. Make sure the cables are above the logic board and they don't get tucked underneath. You can be sure the logic board is correctly in place when the screw holes on the logic board match up with those on the back housing, and the board is flush with those screw holes. You'll also need to press the camera down to secure it into its place. Next, we'll go ahead and plug the cables back into the logic board. Now, if you're working on a 3GS, you want to wait to plug in the final cable, cable number 7, because there is one screw that's hidden beneath the cable that will have to be inserted. The next step is to reinsert the screw that holds the metal piece on top of the camera in place. And it should be pretty self-explanatory how that metal piece is oriented on top of the camera. Now we'll go ahead and insert the SIM card before we put the rest of the logic board screws in, and this will just verify that the logic board is correctly in place. And the final step is to reinstall the front assembly. Again, there are 3 cables, and this time they'll go in the opposite as they came out. So first cable 3, followed by cable 2, and then 1. Now cable 3 will slip inside of the port. Make sure that the tab is pointed in the upward direction while you're doing this. Once you get that cable inserted, flip the tab downwards, and the tension will hold it in place. These next 2 cables just plug into the board. However, the final LCD cable, which will remain here, is going to require that we tilt the screen assembly down at an angle before plugging this in, because otherwise it will come undone. Now this last cable can be tough since we're unable to see it, but once we get it in the right place it should plug right in. When closing the screen, first make sure the top is flush before pressing down on the bottom. And for our final step, we'll install the 2 Phillips screws located on opposite sides of the sync port.